to build a company in the U.S., also for those local companies who want to know how to get connected, how to find opportunities, how to sell your products, how to distribute your products. I'll let Chris. I think your mic set is working.
Good afternoon. My name is Chris Shipley. I'm the CEO of Guidewire Group, and for much of the last way too many years, I've been covering technology as a journalist and analyst, and most recently running Guidewire, a company that provides software and services to help all of you build your businesses and to create a community of mentorship among entrepreneurs and peers and experts. And today we're going to be talking about channels and partnerships. I think that that's just a lot of fancy language for sales. So hopefully we'll really talk about what I think is maybe a counter trend where there is so much of a relentless march to venture investment. I actually believe that if you have a relentless march to your customer and you actually generate revenue for your business, then you have a lot of opportunity to do other things in your business. And so we'll take the conversation in that direction. But this is a conversation not only among our great panelists, but also among all of you. So I hope that as we proceed this afternoon and the time we have together, that you'll become part of that dialogue as well with your questions and your comments, your challenging of our assumptions. Hopefully we'll spend the next hour or so in a lively discussion. So we do have 4 panelists here that bring very different and I think very important capabilities to this conversation. And I'm going to introduce them each briefly, but to allow them then to give us the color commentary on their careers. So to my direct left, to your right, is Duke Powers with Paragon Technical. And Paragon is a semiconductor manufacturer's representative. They've been in business here in the Valley for about 15 years now. A strong partner, I assume, of many early-stage companies and with the industry overall. Then we have cheat sheets. Is it Gota? Did I do okay? It's all my international travel picking this up. Who's a managing partner with Siemens Venture Capital, and I think one of the benefits that Gary brings to this conversation is his experience both as a venture capitalist, as an investor, but also his operational background that I think allows us to see both sides of this picture in this conversation. Sitting next to Garrett is Ronald Carlson, who is responsible for global alliances at Salesforce.com, and also ran channel relationships at Oracle. So a lot of good insights I know that they bring to the panel. And then our last but certainly not least on our panel, Nicholas Greikis is a partner with Eclipse Group, and I think has a unique perspective here as someone with deep experience as an IP attorney, both filing and litigating and protecting patent work, and something that I think is very essential as you think about your sales strategy is ensuring that you also have protection of your IP. So, as I said, a vast and I think very interesting array of talent and experience on the stage today, and I hope you'll join us as we take this conversation away. But I think I'll start and we'll do a quick round robin with you, starting about, tell us a little bit more about Paragon and how you do work with sort of this international innovation ecosystem.
Well, we are a manufacturer rep again, so we represent 10 different semiconductor companies in the Silicon Valley. And we are a technical sales force that works in between our distribution partners, the Arrows and the Avets of the world, to sell semiconductors through the accounts in Northern California. That's from Reno down through the middle of California. So we have the exclusive rights to support our principals, the companies that we represent, getting parts designed in. And most of these parts are shipped over in Asia. So we work together with our Asian counterparts to make sure that we realize our sales of the parts that we get designed in. Some are sole sourced, and some are multi-source. So we got to make sure that we cover the whole sales channel to ensure that our principal who's hired us to win the designs both here and in Asia once they get into production. That's really our role. I have two other partners. We're a C Corp. We're located here in Mountain View, and in my 30th year of doing this, and we're one of the top rep companies in the Valley, and we do 500 million in sales, and we get paid a percentage of it. That's a quick thumbnail sketch of what we're about.
Actually, let me ask you a quick question just for clarity. So you talked about the design component. Are you working with your external engineering teams? Do you have internal teams to actually create these designs?
That's
correct.
correct.
Licensing them?
Yes, we have electrical engineers that work for us. They go out and work with the electrical engineers and managers and component teams to use our specific circuits in their specific designs. And that's really what we're noted for. So we're an outsourced technical sales force. And the advantages that we offer is that we have a lot of different lines. We have a lot of play into the account versus if they went out and had their own direct sales force. And because of that, our position in the Valley over the last 15 years, we've done so well. We have a lot of leverage that's associated with a multi-line sell. So that's what we're about. That's what we try to achieve.
Obviously, a venture organization inside a very large organization. How does that work?
You see that gray hair? That's how it works. Well, let me go back in history a little bit to explain why is there such a thing as a Siemens Venture Capital. And I was still on the operating side of Siemens back then when we finally kind of admitted to ourselves there's so much innovation happening and we need to find a better way to connect with all the innovation happening in the industry and benefit from that and participate in that. And so we started building broader and broader partnering programs and so on. And partnering can happen on all kinds of different levels. It can be very project specific. Sometimes I call that casual dating. And then it can be a very committed relationship when it becomes very, very strategic, kind of the next level behind or below an in-house product. We started making a couple investments. That was in like 97, 98 time frame. We eventually decided to set up a dedicated organization for that because we realized it's important to understand the strategy and know where we want to go with the product portfolio within Siemens. But in order to make venture investments, there's a lot of other skills required for that. So we set up a dedicated organization. We're a little bit the oddball. We are like 30 people worldwide in offices here, Silicon Valley and Boston. Headquarters in Germany. We're a German company, so we have our headquarters in Germany as well. And we have a presence in India and in China. 30 people against 420,000 or so on the mothership. So that makes us the oddballs. We are at the forefront of innovation. We try to identify opportunities that help the operating units within Siemens to enhance their offering, become more competitive, whether this is because they have new advanced features or because they were able to reduce costs or enter new market segments they haven't been playing in before. The business model that we have is really has two mandates. One is the strategic synergies that we're always looking for before we make an investment. But then ultimately, we are greedy like all the other investors also. Our success is measured based on the financial results that we generate, and that's also what is driving our incentive. So we look for strategic synergies, but then we become very much financially motivated in our investments. Maybe a word of explanation, why am I here, or how do I see my role in this discussion? Being an investor and also having the honor to serve on a number of boards of our portfolio companies, I kind of see how they develop and implement their sales strategy. And that quite often starts with a company that has 10 or 20 employees and maybe a first customer who somehow happened to issue a purchase order. And then how do you build the process and how do you get more visibility into your sales and make it more predictable? Because that is what ultimately drives the value of that company. And that is what we as greedy investors would like to see.
So as Chris mentioned, my name is Ron Helston. I work for Salesforce, responsible for ISV in channels, and that means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So I'll just explain sort of the three primary things it means at Salesforce. It means, number one, we have a marketplace called the App Exchange, which is sort of like Google's or Apple's App Store, but this is for enterprise-only apps. It actually just had its 1 millionth install yesterday, so we had a party. His voice is a little rough. So 1 million installs yesterday, so anyone who wants to engage our customer base can do that on the App Exchange. So we're responsible for that. Also responsible for ISVs, and an ISV to us is anyone who builds on our platform or on any of our applications, builds their own IP, delivers that to their customers in a repeatable fashion. And we have over 1,300 of those and growing, and that's a big part of our strategy to expand and ensure that as many companies as possible are utilizing cloud-based technologies. And then finally, we have reseller arm. So whether it's Intuit and Dell, who are really big distributors that we just announced, or an independent systems integrator who wants to start building a monthly subscription business, we have a program for that as well. And so that is ISV channels, and then I get to watch companies every day use different models to go to market and succeed in different ways, and so it's going to be interesting about that.
And Nicholas?
So my name is Nicholas Gickus. I'm a partner with the Eclipse Group. I'm a lawyer. Probably wondering why I'm up here. My practice focuses on intellectual property, patents, and also, so we file patents for companies, whether they're small companies, startups, or very large companies, so we also litigate those patents. In fact, my career has been split between private practice and in-house. Actually, when I was in-house at Marvell Semiconductor. I was director of IP litigation there. I had the pleasure of litigating against Cyro, a little Australian company you guys may have heard of. So they had a very nice Wi-Fi patent, which scooped up quite a few $1 million, I think in the hundreds of $1 millions actually for the Australian government. So patents are actually a good file, they get a good one. So my experience also was with Surf Technology, which was a startup here in Silicon Valley. I was in-house counsel, active general counsel for that company for about 6 years. So I saw a lot of agreements, I wrote a lot of agreements related to the company on distribution and that sort of thing. The company actually did quite well, went public in 2004, and we had a very good ride. It was a GPS chip company, and so I'm familiar on the semiconductor side with how the relationships are between semiconductor product makers and their distribution chains. So I guess I'll rely a little bit on that side.
Well, now you know who we are. I'd like to just get a little sense from this conversation of who you are. So how many of you are founders, CEOs, management of a startup company? And of all of you, how many of you have been in business less than 2 years? So I assume the rest of the hands more than 2 years. How many of you are already in the U.S.? And the rest of you looking to come into the U.S. market? And then finally, B2B companies and consumer. And I'm supposing that those who raised no hands at all are somewhere in the ecosystem. John, I see that. And those who are here in support of all of you. So that's great. That'll help us frame the conversation, I think. I actually am Nicholas, going to start this question with you, which is really about IP protection. I'm assuming that many of the companies have established their IP protection in their home country and is now thinking about expanding into this market. What advice would you have as you begin to sell your products into the U.S. market in terms of, I know there's a lot of debate about patents in the Valley, but what would you, that's, I know, understatement. But what recommendations and advice would you have about, really this is about getting ready to even sell?
I think that, I think probably a lot of the companies here are offshore being outside the United States. If your market is going to be here, I would definitely put some thought into putting in a budget for patent the United States is, as you all know, better than I, one of the world's biggest markets. And one thing that sets us apart, I think, from the rest of the world is the ability to enforce intellectual property protection. I think we have probably the strongest intellectual property protection regime in the world. And if you have markets here, you want to protect those markets, I would definitely advise to think about filing here if you have the money. Even if you don't have the money, try to get the money to do it, because a patent not only protects your IP, your product from competitors, but also if you're trying to raise capital, which I think some of you are, is an important asset to the company that venture capitalists and other investors are going to look at for your company. Also, I would also add that there are ways to do it economically. Filing provisional applications are a cheaper way to do it, so you can save money. You do have to spend the money later, but hopefully you'll have the money later to file utility patents. So I think definitely if you're filing, there are various mechanisms to do it, depending on what your strategy is, depending on where your markets are, where you want to concentrate your legal budget. But the United States is a very important place to do that.
And that should happen with legal counsel here in the States?
You mean filing an application?
Yes.
Yes, it definitely should happen. There are ways, there are mechanisms, for example, and there's something called the Penn Cooperation Treaty, where you can actually file in your home country, and then at some later point in time, file in the United States or other countries. It all depends on what your strategy is. It's very expensive to file patents, especially if you're going to be filing in more than one country. So if you're a small company and you have a limited budget, I would select 1 to 2 countries where you think you're going to be in and allocate your dollars that way.
And many law firms in Silicon Valley, if not elsewhere in the States, understand the growing pains of an early stage company and work with them in different kinds of ways. What structure do you typically use working with, say, a company who, say, the average age here is maybe 2 to 3 years old?
In terms of filing IP protection?
Yeah, and in terms of what your relationship is with the client.
Yeah, my relationship, well, we have, it all depends on what the client needs. I specialize in IP, so if the client needs venture capital, I have relationships with other partners at my firm that have good contacts. If the client needs IP protection, I'm usually the person to deal with. It all depends on, again, the kind of product the client has. If the client has a product which needs patenting soon because they're going to market soon, or because they're going to be talking to potential investors, potential folks going into meetings, then it behooves them to file for intellectual property protection. Because even though an NDA, provides you some confidentiality guarantees, it's not the best way to protect what you've got, especially if it's what you're going to be spending the next 10 to 20 years of your life doing. I would definitely encourage your clients to go for patent protection if they actually got something about it.
I know I framed this conversation to be about revenue, but I have to believe there's some people who are sitting there thinking, yeah, revenue's nice, but wait, there's a venture capitalist on stage. And they had a Lone Star tell me not too long ago when I asked about his business plan. He said, well, we plan to raise venture capital, which is not exactly a business plan. Dan, how do you view this sort of, it's not, I would say the IP issue is a segue, but also then how do you view these kinds of companies coming to you? What do you want to hear about their revenue plans, their business plan, that help you understand not just that there's a strategic fit, that's obviously your first level, but you said you're a greedy venture capitalist, and you want to see that there's a business there. What are you looking for in these companies?
Okay, great question, and a very, very broad question too. So we get to see where to start and where to stop, and West Daisy just
nudging.
So whenever we see a new business what that may come. And one of the very, very first questions we ask is, what does it do for the customer? Who's going to buy it? Why is he or she going to buy it? How they assess the product versus alternatives. And that gets a little bit deeper into the weeds now maybe, what is the buying decision and who is involved in finally pulling the trigger on the purchase order. And if we see a great idea but we're not sure who's ever going to pay for that, then that's not what we would like to do. Maybe other people can see something else, but we always want to have a clear understanding of who's the buyer for that, how would they value that, because that translates ultimately then the price to be paid. And I don't like business plans which are like cost plus or so as a pricing strategy. I want to see value-based pricing. So that's a key point, and maybe bridging a little bit over to what you were talking about. And so once we've established that there's a market opportunity, there's a willing customer base, interesting to spend money on that, we look, well, who else is out there? Who are the competitors, or what are the alternative solutions? And how, as a startup company, can you protect the position that you have? Barriers to entry is a key word there. And that can be in the shape and form of patents. That's a very important tool. And we actually look at patents on different levels. The first question always is there freedom to operate? Which means, is there other IP out there, other patents out there owned by another company, which actually get in your way? Can they stop you doing your business, or can they force you to pay them a big license fee? Or can they force you to take a technical detour, which maybe makes your solution less competitive, or it's commercially not viable? Is the microphone still working? Okay. So that's the first level. And then the next level of patent protection is a little bit more on, can it stop other people from doing what you are doing? There's a lot of business models which are just based on first mover and being ahead of the competition. We know that in many industries that's just how it works. It makes us nervous, and maybe it makes us nervous because we are a more conservative company, and we are more focused on hardware and tangible things, less Web 2.0 and things like that, where you move much, much faster and you stay ahead of the crowd. We are not as good as that. So this is where patents come in as a defensive tool, where you can say, well, I've protected my designs or my, and sometimes even the business process behind it, and through a couple of patents. That is extremely valuable. And from an investor's point of view, looking into startup companies, we pretty much always see patents just as a defensive tool. Very, very few cases will go on the offensive when we feel like someone else is infringing on the IP. Then we will step in there, probably will just send a letter and try to get them to the negotiating table and reach an agreement in the end. We don't like to sue because we would like to be sued. That is extremely expensive. I know a couple of people have figured that out and called the patent trolls and suing and then settling for a couple $100,000 just so that you get rid of the reason. But going back to your key point, the very first question that we ask, besides is there a strategic fit with what the parent company is looking for, what's the value proposition, who would buy it and why, and that's also a topic here.
Duke, Doug was just talking earlier in his answer about sort of the customer fit. And it sounds like you have this interesting process where you've got this component, and there's almost a what can we do with it and how do we design around it process that happens in your organization. How do you go through that process, and how do you engage a larger sort of maybe developer community or engineering community to support that?
Well, we hire very experienced people who understand the signal chain, for one. So we know we have X amount of products that fit in various spots in the signal chain, from the microprocessor down to the power control circuits. And we have a general understanding. We do an assessment of the company, whether it's a startup. We assess, the venture capital strength, where we spend our time. Big part of it is we have to make guesses. We're a small company of 15 people. We have X amount of resources, and we only want to put our time into accounts that we feel that the management has won in the past, the venture capital has won in the past, that we can assess their end product being accepted, to your point, whether they're going to have an ability to sell it at a profit. We have to make all of these assumptions. before we go and even attack the engineering group, because our time is limited and we want to go big. And the only way we're going to go big is spending our time on the best deals possible. I think that's what's made us successful. We've been very adamant about keeping that mode of attacking our business. And that's very difficult because we get pulled in a lot of ways. I'm pulled here today because of a friendship with somebody, but I don't normally let this happen. But I thought I'd help out in some small way. But you know, I mean, from the engineering standpoint, because we're so experienced, we asked to have a high-level overview of what they're doing, and then from there we break it down as to what we might be able to supply. And we also get our principals that we represent, the companies we represent, involved in the process. And it's a very collaborative agreement and relationship we have with them. It's just not Paragon Technical going out and representing them. We bring everybody together as a team. We act as an extension of their company. They often have people working with us to sell our products into. And we, in fact, even work with distribution, as I mentioned earlier. They're a stocking distributor. We don't stock any product. We're simply a middleman technical sales force.
Do you have a good example of how you have worked in the past with sort of an emerging company that maybe either has a component or has a design? It sounds like you've really become, as you said, an extension of the team, a real partner as they take that product or the design to manufacturing and obviously the channel and so on.
Right. I think that, let's say, like in the old days, okay, we knew that they were doing 5 channel switches, okay? We know they need a power supply, we know they need a processor, obviously, and all the supporting circuitry. So we generally have contacts within these new companies. Because we have such a broad experience. And one of the partners would, generally work with a younger salesperson to go figure out through our relationships. We generally have very high-level relationships up to the president of most of these companies. And we quickly get in with the VP of engineering directors and figure out what they're looking at and why. And again, we collaborate with our principals to figure out, the best approach. And if we don't have anything to help them with, we move on. I mean, that's very common too. I mean, we're not here to sell anything they don't need or want.
I could very well imagine that over the years you've built a very, very close relationship with your customers, so you know what they are looking for.
Exactly.
So what for a startup company looks like product planning, for example, is you manage your portfolio of offerings. That
Yes.
You have the products that you want to sell to your customers based on the feedback you're getting. And then you look on the other end, well, who has the best solution for that customer problem?
Absolutely. And I think it's an important point about startups. We have been very, very resistant to spend too much time with startups over the last 10 years. And the rationale, because of that, feels like 6 to 7 tenths of a very large majority of the plan to be bought out and not to go public and not to go big, as we call it. And because of that, we have to be very careful. And we make our money by selling product into volume applications. And we've been very fortunate and blessed. We have an enormous amount of volume applications in Silicon Valley. You look at our, the Apples of the world, all the accounts in the Valley. It's still very strong. But the rep business has gone through a huge change over the last 5 years. Many of the reps have gone out of business. The financial condition of most reps have deteriorated notably. And then you have 5 reps, of which we're one of them, 3 or 4, 5 reps that have become much stronger because of it. And so it's the bigger we get, the bigger, the smaller are just falling off.
But I want to get you into this conversation, and I know that you are Salesforce, and you personally also work with entrepreneurs, work with these businesses on a lot of different levels. Right? There's I'm part of sort of the apps community, and then there's sort of deeper relationships with Salesforce's channel and into its strategic partner relationships. Can you just step us through what some of those levels are and how you sort of a company might engage in each of those?
Sure. So, as I mentioned before, we do have a foundational level, which is the App Exchange. And the App Exchange, again, is for enterprise applications. And it's really, people need to take this into consideration when they're looking for a market, is these are 100,000 customers that are used to consuming solutions, software as a service solutions. They already are running Salesforce. There's 100,000 customers. We've done 1 million installs. I'm no math genius, but that's a lot per customer. And so they're used to sort of looking at new solutions this way. And so we have a lot of partners that build their solutions on their own platforms, build their solutions on whatever they want to build on, and then use the marketplace and some technology that we provide them so they can easily install that on top of the connector through our API, install their application in the UI that these customers are used to seeing. And it's freemium, a lot more freemium, see, try, buy. You get access to 100,000 customers. It works really well for a lot of customers. That's usually the starting point for most of our technical partnerships. What happens after that is they start looking at their platforms, they start looking at our platform, they start thinking about what their next step, what next step they want to take. And some of them like selling to our install base. Some of them actually, the dentist office applications or veterinary applications, they're building something totally separate. And they'll build on top of the platform, and sometimes they'll build on top of our CRM or our service or on top of chat, because they were going to build the same type of social application in some way, shape, or form, and they don't want to build all the underlying infrastructure for social. They're just going to use our technology, white box it, make it look like theirs, and get it out in the market, and not worry about who's running the underlying infrastructure, the security model, provisioning, the API, things like that. So they don't have to build any of that stuff. They can just take our IP and take the next step. And those are our ISVs, and that's probably the biggest growing community, people verticalizing what we're doing already and selling it out into their own space. As a matter of fact, probably our biggest partner that's doing, they're doing very, very well as an independent CRM vendor in pharmaceutical sales. And no one really knows what their sales force underneath. And they're just out there and just doing amazingly well for a 4-year-old company. And so these ISVs are doing really well, and that's the meat of the folks that we support. And at the very highest level, we have GSIs and RSIs, systems integrators that help with our implementations, but they also start now building IP. The more they start repeating solutions, they start building IP, and they're out there in the market taking our technology and making vertical solutions out of that as well. We have some strategic relationships there. And I mentioned Dell and Intuit. Those are also some strategic distributors of ours. And in software as a service, there isn't a huge model for distributors and VADs and distribution. And so everyone's sort of moving into this market in slowly, the distributors are anyways, and we hope to help the Intuits and the Dells and the Avnets of the world build segregator businesses where they're bringing together several leading SaaS solutions, bundling them up using different forms of technology we're helping them with, and then providing these out to the market so they can have a sort of a new business model, because holding inventory is gone. I think holding IP is probably gone as software is, the VATs with a contract with Cisco that gives you a discount as a VAR that's similar to a larger company. I think with software as a service, things like that are going to go away. And so a lot of these VATs are looking for really great software as a service solutions that they can pair up and show value to customers by pulling together 4 or 5 of the best solutions out there for a small manufacturing company that's all software as a service. And we're seeing that happening as well. Across all of those slices of businesses that we manage, we have about 100 people who get up every day, and the only thing that they're goaled on in life is you as a partner making the first dollar that you make. So their only goal is you being a commercial success, which is an interesting sort of model too. When they get assigned to you to help you, move through our site or develop your technology or get onto the app exchange, we actually monitor what your commercial success looks like. And depending on how well you do, that's how well the person supporting you does inside the company. And this we don't succeed till you succeed sort of model is once people sort of dig under the covers inside of being a partner with Salesforce, they realize you can't get that anywhere else. And now, we've seen 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 startups that have gone through the first $200K to first $1 million to first $2 million. And we've got 1 million models to help people figure out what they need to do next, how they need to market, how they need to use the tools we have, what shows they need to go to. We're sort of little business advisors to get people up and running. And so that's basically what our team does.
So it sounds like in your partnering relationship, there's as much support for sort of best practices around building, business building and marketing and these sorts of things, maybe more so than being the water carrier for that product into the market.
Yeah.
It's really helping the startup entity do that.
And this is the thing about being a water carrier, is everybody wants a bigger company to help them draft, and we do as much as that as we can. You can't depend on a company like Salesforce to sell your product for you, but we can give you the best expertise, what we've seen work before, but in the end, the responsibility is the ISVs, the technology partners. But we do open a lot of doors for the aggressive folks that use all the tools that are available to them and sort of stand on the shoulder of giants before. As a matter of fact, our sort of program, I don't want to get a big product pitch, but when we pitch our technology that we call ISV Force that's on top of our platform, half that value prop is the actual 10 years of sort of learnings of what it takes to run a software as a service business, and we've applied all those, made it into tools, and then productized it. So Salesforce is sort of the platform's biggest ISV, and the same tools Salesforce uses to manage everyone and make sure we do renewals and how our billing systems work. You get that when you become a partner of Salesforce. And it's those type of things that sometimes during a scaling moment can slow a company down significantly, because you have the greatest product in the world. If you can't get it to market, you can't scale it, you can't get past your 10th customer, and you're building a security model instead of building a product, it's going to slow you down.
So this relationship often between an emerging company and some larger entities, and you also represent a different facet of that large channel partner. It's something that I've always referred to as dancing with elephants. With all due respect, it's sort of very large entities and these tiny little emerging companies. And you gotta be careful you don't get stepped on in that relationship. For each of you, I'd love to get sort of your best advice on how these young companies can approach either you directly or organizations like yours, or maybe in your case some of your larger partners, to do that dance more effectively. You mentioned this in sort of the way you look at who you might partner with. What occurred to me was, what filters can you help create so that you're not hearing, you want to hear about the good deals that are most the best fit for what you're doing, and you want to save and be respectful of the startup's time and not use a lot of your time on vetting. How are you doing that, and what advice would you give to these folks about how to do that effectively with you or with some of your partners?
I think it depends on what you're trying to achieve, but it has to be done very carefully. It's an art. The best reps do this very well, and others struggle with it. And often what we do is we try to be as transparent as possible and explain what we're trying to achieve. But some people get turned off by it, and we're willing to risk that because our time is everything. It's all we have is our time. But generally what we do is we try to go to our friends with these new companies that are starting up and to build support and understand it quickly. When we don't have that, and oftentimes, sometimes we don't, we rely on the strength of our principles and get some minimal engagements going first, and then from there we go in and work harder to understand it. But a lot of the information is available on the web. I could have one of our junior people bring in an opportunity, and I'll ask them 5 questions, how much money they have, what's their burn rate, what's their product, who's their end customer, who's their number one competition going to be, how are they doing, all the basic information that you would ask. Also, we quickly vet that and say, all right, well, my rough guess tells me that whatever time you spend it, they ought to be very cooperative. And I guess to answer your question, I'd be very cooperative with people who are trying to understand to a degree what you're trying to achieve so they can help you better. And I know that you're trying to protect your IP and you don't want to spend time with it. You want to limit the time you're spending too, I get that. So there has to be some reasonable give and take, especially if you're particularly interested in the product or service that an individual is potentially providing to you.
This kind of brings up the topic of non-disclosure agreements. We hear a lot of young companies say, well, I'll tell you, but would you sign this document that swears to secrecy and all this sort of thing? And I think we all in one way or another can comment on how that is perceived, but I'm wondering, particularly as people might come to you with this kind
all there. Yeah, sure. That's what goes back to my point. It's an art because we understand that our customers are trying to protect their identity, their product ideas. They want it to slip out, and we get that. But we offer to sign non-disclosures immediately. We get right to that, right out of the chute, and we're covered when we have a deeper engagement. We're also covered by the people that we represent in their non-disclosures. But as a president of the company, I'm willing to sign any non-disclosure that makes sense immediately.
I'm guessing the rest of the panels are non-signers. Is that fair?
I wouldn't say non-signers, but if someone approaches us and says, I have a great idea, a super product, and Siemens would love to have it, just sign the NDA and I'll tell you what it is. I'll have to say, sorry, first you tell me what it is, and we'll figure out whether we want to go to a certain level of detail where it really makes sense to sign an NDA. So it's a little bit of a hurdle. Once we feel, yes, it's indeed worth spending a lot more time and digging much, much deeper, we're happy to sign an NDA. We know why we're being asked to sign an NDA, and we do that, but not for every business plan that we receive. And just to give you an order of magnitude, we see between 2,000 and 3,000 plans every year within the organization. So just no way on earth that we can sign 2,000 NDAs every year and administer them between the different terms that they have and whatsoever. That's just not doable. So if we sign maybe 50 a year or so, I think 50 to 100 is probably the realistic number.
How does, especially when you're going deeper into a partner
I
relationship?
learned my lesson a long time ago on NDAs at Oracle. So the first thing I did at Salesforce is we have a click-through NDA, and I will not negotiate. They just click through and we're done. And it saves tons of time and friction. If somebody's going to spend a week talking about NDA terms, I don't want to deal with it.
So what is the click-through NDA?
It's just an NDA that binds us both to whatever we're going to talk about.
So you obviously you're dealing with a lot of what we perceive as their crown jewels. How do you address that?
I would just advise the client that they need to be careful what they disclose. Don't disclose the crown jewels. If the barrier to entry example is pretty low, and what the idea is something that, for example, we were a small company. I was with a small company. We had a GPS chip, and we were negotiating with other big companies, very large companies that had their own development programs in the same area. So we were competing against internal solutions. And we had to be very careful about what we said. And if it's at the business plan stage, probably don't need